How many of you knew that one of the most famous battles of the War of 1812 was actually fought after the war had officially ended? Why would this even happen? The War of 1812, between the fledgling United States and the powerful Empire of Great Britain, is a war that is often left in the background of American history. After all, this was a war that didn't end in a clear and heroic victory for the United States. But this war produced a number of rather notable events. One of those events established one man as a national hero and catapulted him directly to the presidency. This event was one of the most famous and more lopsided battles of the entire war. The Battle of New Orleans. The Battle of New Orleans was fought on January 8, 1815, and though the War of 1812 had officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent just a few weeks earlier, news of the treaty had not yet reached American shores. The result was a clash that seemed at first glance an afterthought, but in reality, it would play a crucial role in shaping the American identity. Today we'll explore how this unlikely victory unfolded, the key players involved, and its lasting impact on American history. So once you've hit that like button and subscribed to the channel, sit back, relax, and let's prepare to unravel the details of this intriguing Gulf Coast battle. Before we dive into the events of the battle, we must first understand the background of the War of 1812. Andrew Jackson's rise to prominence and why New Orleans was such an important strategic location. The War of 1812 is sometimes referred to as the Second War for American Independence. Though the United States had won its independence from Britain nearly 30 years earlier, tensions remained high between the two nations. British interference with American trade, their practice of impressing American sailors into the Royal Navy, and their support of Native American attacks against U.S. settlers on the frontier all contributed to the conflict. When President James Madison declared war on Great Britain in June 1812, the young United States faced a daunting challenge. The British Empire was arguably the most powerful military force in the world, while the U.S. was still developing its army and navy. The war was fought on multiple fronts: the Great Lakes, the Canadian border, the Atlantic coast, and in the South. As the war dragged on, both sides suffered losses and stalemates. But by the end of 1814, negotiations between the British and Americans had finally begun, and the Treaty of Ghent was signed on December 24th of that year. However, the slow pace of communication across the Atlantic meant that the news of peace had not yet reached either army in New Orleans. At the heart of the American defense at New Orleans was a man who would soon become a national icon, Andrew Jackson. Born in 1767 in the back country of the Carolinas, Jackson grew up in the harsh realities of frontier life. He was just a teenager during the American Revolution and had a deep-seated hatred for the British after being captured and mistreated by them during the war. Jackson's experiences as a young man shaped him into a fierce, determined leader, known for his toughness and no-nonsense attitude, qualities that earned him the nickname Old Hickory. By the time of the War of 1812, Jackson had already gained prominence as a military leader in battles against the Creek Nation in the southeast, a conflict that was part of the larger struggle between the U.S. and Native Americans over territory. His victories in the Creek War, particularly the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, showcased his military acumen and solidified his reputation as a skilled tactician. When the British set their sights on New Orleans, Jackson was the man tasked with defending the city, and by extension, the entire Mississippi River, a critical artery for trade and transportation. New Orleans was the jewel of the South and a vital gateway to the interior of North America. Situated at the mouth of the Mississippi River, it was a crucial port for goods coming in and out of the American Midwest. Control of New Orleans meant control of the Mississippi, and control of the Mississippi meant dominance over the economic lifeblood of the nation. The British knew this, and so did Andrew Jackson. In late 1814, the British launched an ambitious campaign to capture the city. Their strategy was simple: take New Orleans, choke off American trade, and force the U.S. government into conceding more favorable terms in peace negotiations. If they succeeded, it would be a devastating blow to the young republic. In December 1814, General Andrew Jackson arrived in New Orleans to prepare for the impending British assault. But he faced a daunting task. His forces were vastly outnumbered and consisted of a patchwork army made up of regular U.S. troops, local militia, free black soldiers, Native American allies, and even a group of pirates led by the infamous Jean Lafitte. Though many of the men were tough and hardened with some combat experience, most of that experience was gained from smaller skirmishes and the irregular nature of warfare that was typical of frontier life. Despite the challenges, Jackson and his men were determined, and his ability to unite such a diverse force would prove to be one of his greatest achievements. In mid-December, British forces arrived off the coast of Louisiana and began landing soldiers from barges on December 23rd. Knowing that his forces were significantly outnumbered and the city's defenses ill-prepared to withstand a British assault, Jackson developed a bold and risky strategy. Jackson decided to surprise the British while they were still landing their troops, and with a little luck, could weaken their forces and buy his own army a little more time to make their preparations to defend New Orleans. Jackson mustered almost half his men and began a night march toward the British. Nighttime engagements in the early 19th century were extremely dangerous, but it was a necessary risk as far as Jackson was concerned. Jackson divided his forces into 3 groups and simultaneously attacked the British at their encampment. Despite being caught off guard, the British fought back fiercely. After a bloody and intense exchange, Jackson, having inflicted some damage on the British forces, was forced to pull back across the canal just a few miles outside New Orleans. Though the night raid on the British was a tactical defeat, for Jackson it was a strategic victory. It forced the British to remain encamped and set the tone for the battle to come. This bought Jackson the time he needed to prepare the city's defenses for the main engagement that was soon to come. Jackson and his men worked tirelessly to fortify the city, erecting defensive earthworks along the Rodriguez Canal just south of the city. This would become the key defensive line during the battle. Ramparts were constructed more than 5 feet high and 20 feet deep. Artillery was strategically placed and dug in at regular intervals. Everything was coming together, and Jackson knew it. Meanwhile, the British, under the command of General Sir Edward Pakenham, were preparing their assault. With a force of around 8,000 seasoned professional soldiers, they were confident they could crush Jackson's motley army of fewer than 6,000 men and seize New Orleans. Bold and confident, Pakenham and his men had no idea what they were marching into. The British assault began in earnest on January 8, 1815. In the early morning fog, Pakenham's troops launched a frontal assault on Jackson's defensive positions. What the British didn't anticipate was the effectiveness of the American defenses and the skill with which Jackson's men would fight. As the British advanced, they were met with a withering hail of artillery and musket fire from the American lines. Jackson's troops, dug in behind their earthworks, fired volley after volley into the advancing British ranks. The defenders also had the advantage of knowing the terrain. The swamps and canals surrounding New Orleans made it difficult for the British to maneuver. Despite their superior numbers, the British were unable to break through the American lines. General Pakenham himself was mortally wounded during the battle, and the British forces were thrown into disarray. The fighting continued for several hours, but by midday it was clear that the British had been decisively defeated. Jackson's forces, though heavily outnumbered, had inflicted over 2,000 casualties on the British, compared to only around 70 American casualties. The Battle of New Orleans was a stunning victory for the United States and a devastating defeat for the British. It was a classic David versus Goliath story, with Jackson's ragtag army overcoming a far superior force. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the battle was that it took place after the Treaty of Ghent had already been signed, officially ending the war. Though the battle had no direct impact on the terms of the treaty, it had a profound effect on the American psyche. The victory at New Orleans bolstered national pride and gave Americans a much-needed sense of accomplishment after what had been a largely inconclusive war. It also propelled Andrew Jackson to national fame, setting the stage for his eventual rise to the presidency in 1829. Andrew Jackson's triumph at New Orleans cemented his reputation as a war hero and a symbol of American resilience. He became the embodiment of the self-made man, a figure who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential leaders in American history. However, Jackson's legacy is a complex one. While his leadership during the War of 1812 and his presidency brought about significant changes, such as expanding American democracy and reshaping the nation's political landscape, he also left behind a controversial legacy, particularly regarding his policies on Native American removal and his opposition to the National Bank. Nevertheless, the Battle of New Orleans remains one of his crowning achievements and a defining moment in American history. The Battle of New Orleans was more than just a military victory. It was a moment of national unity and pride. Against all odds, Andrew Jackson and his diverse army defended the city and ensured the continued growth of the United States. The battle showed that the young nation was capable of standing up to the greatest military powers of the time and coming out victorious. Though it came after the official end of the war, the Battle of New Orleans left a lasting legacy in American history, and its hero, Andrew Jackson, would go on to shape the course of the nation in profound ways. If you enjoyed this video, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more videos of events that shape the world. We are the Minutemen of history.